Hello, and welcome to the Doom Boomer. I'm Conroy Pitt, and I like to do this little video blog once a week or so to document some of the doomy things happening in the world. I'm a bunker half full kind of guy and refuse to believe we're about to die in a fiery nuclear apocalypse. I try to look for the things that make the doom at least a little more interesting and maybe even a little inspiring for whatever time we have left. And the people of Ukraine have been an inspiration to the whole world, standing up for their freedom against an absolutely mad invasion by Russia. Nobody would have guessed 5 days ago that Kyiv would still be holding out. President Zelensky has passed into legend now, no matter what happens. Freedom fighters are coming from hither and yon, Spanish Civil War style. Europeans are giving Ukrainians weapons. Russia has largely been cut off from the SWIFT banking system, whatever that is. Perhaps I need to Google that. And they have been hit by sanctions. It's hard to believe that this is Putin's game plan. My fear is that Putin's wounded ego will unleash terrible weapons on the people. In conventional warfare, Putin has already lost, I feel. He needed to take Kyiv at least in the first few days. He has been embarrassed and possibly even defeated militarily. He may pound the cities in rage, but he needed a collapse for this thing to work. And the Ukrainian people did not collapse. Putin's tanks continued to dive deeper into the country, breaking down and running out of gas along the way. He's put his nuclear forces on high alert. And my wife and I have told each other we love one another and have had a wonderful life together. The only way I can see Putin breaking the military stalemate is not with tanks, but with air power. And it's horrific to think of Russians bombing Ukrainians, but hey, here they are attacking them with tanks and armies. The Ukrainian ambassador to the UN said that if Putin wanted to kill himself, why use nuclear weapons? Why not finish himself in a bunker like Hitler? Has Putin lost his mind? Probably not. But he seems to have lost touch with the general consensus in the civilized world that war is a bad thing and not a way to get what you want. Putin thinks he's above global consensus and can reabsorb the Ukrainian grain basket back into the stagnant Russian economy by force of will and arms, like a move on a risk map. Putin needs to be given a face-saving off-ramp. He's already lost this invasion, and the longer it continues, the more endangered his presidency is. Moving forward, his disaster and defeat is unimaginable. There were talks in the Belarus frontier between Russian and Ukrainian officials. And at this point, both sides should want out. This is messing up the Russian economy in a bad way, not to mention the Ukrainian economy, and will hurt the Russian people. In a now deleted article in Russian state media, they lay out clearly Putin's plans, his vision for Europe and the New World. I'll read it in full because I think it's important to hear. I think it's important to hear what their vision for the world is. In an article by Petr Akopov, a new world is being born before our eyes. Russia's military operation in the Ukraine has ushered in a new era. Russia is restoring its unity. The tragedy of 1991, this terrible catastrophe in our history, its unnatural dislocation, has been overcome. Yes, at a great cost. Yes, through the tragic events of a virtual civil war, because now brothers separated by belonging by the Russian and Ukrainian armies are still shooting at each other. But there will be no more Ukraine as anti-Russia. Russia is restoring its historical fullness, gathering the Russian world, the Russian people together in its entirety of Great Russians, Belarusians, and Little Russians. If we had abandoned this, if we had allowed the temporary division to take hold for centuries, then we would not only betray the memory of our ancestors, but we'd also be cursed by our descendants for allowing the disintegration of the Russian land. Vladimir Putin has assumed, without a drop of exaggeration, an historic responsibility by deciding not to leave the solution of the Ukrainian question to future generations. After all, the need to solve it would always remain the main problem for Russia, for two key reasons. And the issue of national security, that is, the creation of anti-Russia from Ukraine and an outpost for the West to put pressure on us, is only the second most important among them. The first would always be the complex of a divided people, a complex of national humiliation. When the Russian house first lost part of its foundation, Kiev, and then was forced to come to terms with the existence of two states, not one, but two peoples. That is, either to abandon their history, agreeing with the insane versions that only Ukraine is the real Russia, or to gnash one's teeth helplessly, remembering the times when we lost Ukraine, returning Ukraine, that is, turning it back to Russia, would be more and more difficult with every decade recoded. The Russification of Russians and inciting Ukrainian Little Russians against Russians would gain momentum. Now, this problem is gone. Ukraine has returned to Russia. This does not mean that its statehood will be liquidated, but it will be reorganized, reestablished, and returned to its natural state as part of the Russian world. In what borders, in what form will the alliance with Russia be fixed? Through the CSTO and the Eurasian Union, or the Union State of Russia and Belarus. This will be decided after the end is put in the history of Ukraine as anti-Russia. In any case, the period of the split of the Russian people is coming to an end. And here begins the second dimension of the coming new era. It concerns Russia's relations with the West. not even Russia, but the Russian world, that is 3 states, Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine, acting in geopolitical terms as a single whole. These relations have entered a new stage. The West sees the return of Russia to its historical borders in Europe, and he is loudly indignant at this. Although in the depths of his soul, he must admit to himself that it could not be otherwise. Did someone in the old European capitals, in Paris and Berlin, seriously believe that Moscow would give up Kiev? That the Russians will forever be a divided people? And that at the same time, when Europe is uniting, when the German and French elites are trying to seize control of European integration from the Anglo-Saxons and assemble a united Europe, forgetting that the unification of Europe became possible only thanks to the unification of Germany, which happened according to the good Russian, although not very smart will. The swipe after that of Russian land is not only the height of ingratitude, but also of geopolitical stupidity. The USA as a whole, and even more so Europe in particular, did not have the strength to keep Ukraine in its sphere of influence, and even more so to take Ukraine for itself. In order not to understand this, one has to be geopolitical fools. More precisely, there was only one option to bet on the further collapse of Russia, that is, the Russian Federation. But the fact that it didn't work should have been clear 20 years ago. And already, 15 years ago, after Putin's Munich speech, even the deaf could hear Russia's returning. Now the West is trying to punish Russia for the fact that it returned, for not justifying its plans to profit at its expense, for not allowing the expansion of Western space to the east. Seeking to punish us, the West thinks that relations with us are necessary to us. But this has not been the case for a long time. The world has changed. And this is well understood not only by Europeans, but also by the Anglo-Saxons who rule the West. No amount of Western pressure on Russia will lead to anything. There will be losses from the sublimation of confrontation on both sides. But Russia is ready for the morally and geopolitically. But for the West itself, an increase in the degree of confrontation incurs huge costs, and the main ones are not at all economic. Europe, as part of the West, wanted autonomy. The German project of European integration does not make strategic sense while maintaining the Anglo-Saxon ideological, military, and geopolitical control over the old world. Yes, and it cannot be successful because the Anglo-Saxons need a controlled Europe. But Europe needs autonomy for another reason as well. In case the states go into self-isolation as a result of growing internal conflicts and contradictions, our focus on the Pacific region, where the geopolitical center of gravity is moving. But the confrontation with Russia, into which the Anglo-Saxons are dragging Europe, deprives the Europeans of even the chance of independence, not to mention the fact that Europe is trying to impose a break with China. If now the Atlanticists are happy that the Russian threat will
will unite the Western Bloc, then in Berlin and Paris, they cannot fail to understand that, having lost hope for autonomy, the European project will simply collapse in the medium term. That is why independent-minded Europeans are now completely uninterested in building a new Iron Curtain on their eastern borders, realizing that it will turn into a corral for Europe, whose century, more precisely, half a millennium of global leadership is over in any case, but various options for its future are still possible. Because the construction of a new world order, and this is the third dimension of current events, is accelerating. And its contours are more and more clearly visible through the spreading cover of Anglo-Saxon globalization. A multi-pillared world has finally become a reality. The operation in Ukraine is not capable of rallying anyone but the West against Russia, because the rest of the world sees and understands perfectly well this is a conflict between Russia and the West. This is a response to the geopolitical expansion of the Atlanticists. This is Russia's return of its historical space and its place in the world. China and India, Latin America and Africa, the Islamic world, and Southeast Asia, no one believes that the West leads the world order, much less sets the rules of the game. Russia has not only challenged the West, it has shown the era of Western global domination can be considered completely and finally over. The new world will be built by all civilizations and centers of power naturally, together with the West, united or not, but not in its terms and not according to its rules.
I feel this as a Canadian, because it's how I imagine a USA invasion of my country going down. I feel this as a Canadian, a neighbor who we've seen as traditional close allies with whom we share fairly close culture and common language. To be attacked by them would be terrible. We will remember the Ukrainians if that time comes. I think we'd even have our own breakaway regions like Alberta and Saskatchewan and Quebec, which wouldn't leave much left, but actually that's a topic for another video. Until next time, if there is a next time.